I am Vane Oralis, third curator of the Reclassification Division, Cartographers Guild of Sereth. I have held this post for 31 cycles. In that time, I have signed off on 4 sector reclassifications, boundary disputes, navigation hazard updates, the usual administrative grief of a galaxy that will not stop moving. The reclassification I am recording today is the 5th. It is the only one I have ever filed without sending a follow-up survey. It is the only one I expect to file without ever reopening. The file number is RD-7704H. The sector in question is the one we designated human space in the Guild's earlier mapping epochs, before the propagation event, when we still sent survey ships in and received them back. I am recording this account because Guild protocol requires that a reclassification of this magnitude carry a curator's personal attestation, not a committee summary, not a data table, a voice. Someone whose name sits beneath the annotation and who can be held to it. My name is beneath it. This is my attestation. I will be clear about what the record says, and clear about what it does not say. The record does not say that humans destroyed the Veth-Kar propagation. We do not know that. The record says the propagation entered human space and did not come back out, and that every monitoring instrument we placed at the boundary eventually went silent, and that the silence has now persisted for 19 standard cycles without interruption. What killed the propagation, if killed is even the correct word for what happens to an organism that can redistribute itself across 11 colonial nodes, we cannot say. We stopped asking, because asking required sending something into the sector, and nothing we sent returned. That is the record. Let me fill it in. The Veth-Kar propagation was not an enemy. It was not a fleet, not a civilization, not a decision-maker. It was a life form, a distributed, colony architecture organism capable of rapid adaptive cycling. In plain terms, it encountered a new environment, and it changed itself to fit that environment, faster than most species change across generations. We had tracked it for 6 cycles before the human space event. It had moved through the outer Serath Reach, the Dovan Drift Belt, and the far edge of the Kuleth Nebula system. In each location, it had adapted, expanded, and eventually stripped the available biological substrate before moving on. It was not malicious. It was simply very good at surviving. We noticed it approaching the human space boundary the way you notice weather on a long-range scan, with the calm of distance. The Guild flagged it. We issued advisories to the species resident along the approach corridor. We convened a risk assessment panel, which is what the Guild does when it wants the appearance of urgency without committing to a course of action. The panel met 6 times over the span of 20 days. It considered intercept barriers. It considered targeted disruption of the propagation's colony nodes at the outer fringe, before it reached the boundary. It considered whether human space authorities, if such a structure existed in any form we could reach, might be notified and given the opportunity to respond. None of these options was pursued. The intercept barrier estimate came back too costly, too slow to deploy. The disruption model required instruments we didn't have positioned, and the human contact question died in committee the moment someone pointed out that the Guild had not had a confirmed exchange with a human space authority in 43 cycles, and that the last 3 vessels dispatched to establish such contact had not returned. We debated for too long, which is what committees do, and by the time the debate concluded, the propagation had already crossed the boundary marker at the edge of the human-designated exclusion zone. I will tell you what we expected. We expected it to do what it had always done: adapt, expand, and eventually emerge somewhere further in, carrying modified genetic architecture and looking for the next host-rich environment. We expected to track its exit vector and update our containment models. We placed 12 monitoring probes at even intervals along the boundary. We settled in to wait. The first probe went silent 41 days after the propagation crossed the line. We logged it as a malfunction. Equipment fails, particularly in boundary-adjacent space, where certain deep field interference patterns are common enough that a failed relay is the first, most reasonable explanation. The second went silent on day 63. We logged it as a cascade fault. One failing unit sometimes disturbs its neighbor in the relay chain, and 63 days was not so far from 41 that the 2 silences felt related, rather than coincidental. The third went silent on day 71. I remember the meeting where my predecessor, second curator Imas Dovan Rel, sat at the head of the long table in the chart room and said nothing for a full interval after the third silence was reported. The rest of the panel was already generating explanations. Relay degradation. The propagation's colonial architecture interfering with the probe's signal geometry. Boundary field scatter, which was real and documented, and had eaten signals before. Emas let us talk. She sat with her hands flat on the table surface and looked at the sector chart pinned to the wall, the one with the human boundary drawn in the old survey notation, the thick amber line that predated my tenure by generations, and she did not join the conversation. She did not say, "Something is wrong." She did not say, "Send a retrieval vessel." She said only, "Log it and continue monitoring." We did not understand yet what the silence meant, because we were still thinking of the propagation as the subject of the sentence. We were thinking, what is the propagation doing to our probes? We had not yet turned the question around. By day 104, 6 probes were dark. By day 149, by day 160, the last 3 went silent within the same 8-day window, as though whatever was happening at the boundary had simply finished. Emas Dovenrell submitted her resignation from the curator post 11 days later. She did not give a formal reason. I was elevated to third curator and handed a file with 12 probe serial numbers and 12 timestamps and 12 flatline telemetry records, and asked to determine a cause. I could not determine a cause. Not for lack of trying. We sent a passive relay buoy, no sensors, just a repeater, nothing with biological components or active systems that might attract attention. It relayed for 9 days before it too went quiet. We sent a long-range optical drone, no propulsion of its own, just a drifting eye. It transmitted for 6 days. Then it stopped. Whatever was happening inside the boundary, it was not discriminating between probes and drones, between active and passive, between equipment that could be mistaken for an organism and equipment that clearly could not. Things crossed the boundary. They stopped transmitting. That was the complete dataset. What I can tell you about the Veth core propagation's fate is this. The return signature data we collected in the first 40 days after it crossed, before the probes began to fail, showed the propagation was adapting at an extraordinary rate, faster than we had ever recorded, not slower, faster. It was encountering something inside the human boundary that was driving its adaptive cycles into overdrive. We thought, for a brief period, that this meant it was thriving. We were wrong. There is a ceiling to how fast an organism can adapt. There is a point at which the pressure demanding adaptation exceeds the organism's capacity to complete it, and the organism does not emerge changed. It simply does not emerge. What the data showed us, in retrospect, was not the propagation succeeding, it was the propagation losing. The human biosphere is not a weapon. I want to be precise about this. We have no evidence that any human made a decision regarding the Veth propagation. We have no evidence that humans were aware of the propagation's entry. We have no evidence of a defensive action, an engineered response, or any deliberate act. What the human space boundary appears to represent, based on everything we have not been able to recover from it, is an environment, a set of conditions, biological or otherwise, that the propagation could not resolve. It adapted as fast as it could. The human environment adapted faster, or did not need to adapt at all, or simply was what it was, and what it was turned out to be a ceiling. The propagation hit it and stopped. 19 cycles of silence, no propagation signature, no probe signal, no drone return, no indication from any external observation point that anything which entered the human boundary during this period has exited it. The reclassification I am filing today changes human space's designation from navigation caution, avoid unless survey cleared, to biologically terminal, no entry authorized. This is the strongest designation the Guild applies. It has been used 3 times in the Guild's recorded history. The other 2 designations refer to dead systems, locations where stellar events have rendered approach lethal. This is the first time we have applied it to a region that is, by all external indicators, alive and inhabited, and continuing to go about its business without apparent concern for the designation we have assigned it. I do not know what lives inside that boundary, beyond the humans themselves. I do not know if the humans are aware of what their space does to things that enter it. I do not know if the silence is an answer, or simply what the absence of an answer sounds like when it has been going on long enough. What I know is this. I am the 3rd curator of the Reclassification Division. My name is on the file. The sector is blank. The annotation stands. I will not send another probe.